Welcome to Alexandrians with Daniel Karim, where I interview authors, both living and dead ones, through the power of AI. In this conversation, I sit with Cameron Bright, actor, filmmaker, and founder. Cameron began acting as a child and rose to international prominence through standout performances in films like The Butterfly Effect, Birth, where he starred alongside Nicole Kidman, and Thank You for Smoking with Aaron Eckhart. He went on to appear in many movies such as X-Men: The Last Stand with Hugh Jackman, and later in the Twilight Saga, establishing himself as one of the defining young actors of our generation. Through his art, Cameron has impacted hundreds of millions of people around the whole world, me including. In this conversation, we talk about his journey, what he learned from working alongside the most prominent people in the world, how to grow up when you're a little bit different, and the darker side of Hollywood. I hope this episode helps everybody who is a bit of a unicorn himself and can learn from the unique experience that Cameron has accumulated. Please enjoy this conversation, and if it resonates with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others. Cameron, it's an honor to have you on the show and to connect with you after such a while.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks for having me again, I guess I could say. And yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, man, for people who don't know you, how would you introduce yourself? Because you are a man, I think in my mind, you are a Hemingwayish kind of character, a man of different parts who has had many different chapters where it can be difficult to summarize the totality of you. How do you introduce yourself lately?
I'm just a guy, just trying to make it in life. No, yeah, I guess for anybody that doesn't know, my name's Cameron Bright. I grew up in the film industry, started at a young age, around like 5 or 6. Quickly got into, pretty decent films and everything by like the age of 10 and went from there into my early 20s doing that, and then took a step back from that and got into just kind of simple retail. I'm from Canada, so I was in the legal cannabis industry, various jobs, and then crypto, and pretty much leads to now. So that's the easy way to introduce myself. Um, and yeah, I'm sure we'll get into plenty more, plenty more over the next little bit here.
Yeah, it's I was blessed to know you now for I think it's 2 years, 2.5 years,
Yeah,
three
it's
years.
probably like 3 years now, probably,
Jesus
I'd
Christ.
say.
3 years. And
Something
you,
like that.
yeah, and we've met over one of my AI companies back in the day for which we collaborated. And one of
Mhm.
my earliest memories was within our first call was what kind of a popcorn brain you're having. I
Mhm.
feel there's ideas popping out of you all the time. So
Yeah.
one of my first question was, when was the first sign during uh, your journey of becoming where you said, "Oh, I'm actually quite creative, and I'm whatever channel you're tapped into, like there's something going on there."
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's more yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously growing up in the film industry, one could say that I've probably always been creative. Maybe it's just me being, I'm a January baby, so I'm an Aquarius, so I believe we're supposed to be creative, but yeah. No, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I guess I've kind of always been that way. I've always just been big into, I mean, artistry, I guess you could say. I've always been big, huge into music and, that kind of stuff. It's funny, I don't really see myself necessarily as being that creative, I guess, but yeah, I just have random thoughts sometimes. Then I'm like, yeah, someone's gonna do that someday, and then I'm gonna be like, why didn't I focus on that? Um, but yeah, no, it's just kind of, I guess you could say, I've always been, I guess you could say, like a student of, history and life and kind of everything around me. I guess I was fortunate enough, obviously, from my my acting and all that jazz to, kind of be encouraged to be a bit more of, a thinker and creative and so on. Um, so yeah, I guess probably at a young age at some point I realized that, I was creative. However, whatever that translates to, who knows? But but yeah.
I feel you're one of those people who can see glimpses of the future. And to quote one of your fellow Canadians who also gets into kind of trouble lately, Dr. Jordan Peterson, he has
Oh
done some
yeah.
studies with creative people. And one of the things that surprised me was there's this idea that everybody can be creative, but he did some studies, and I think what he at the University of, I think, Ontario or something. I'm getting the
Yeah, I feel
McGill.
like he's
I
like,
think
yeah, I was
McGill or
gonna say, I
something.
feel like he's, yeah, I was gonna say, I thought, yeah, he's one of those like Guelph or McGill or whatever. But yeah,
McGill,
anyways.
McGill probably. But one of the things he found out that this the median for creative contributions of the average person is zero. And when your Wikipedia page is 18 pages long, it feels like, and I didn't know that when the first I met you, like just how much creative projects you were a part of. So one of the things that I would be interested in is like maybe even this time before your acting career began, what's the story, for instance, one of your parents tells when it comes to early signs of your artistic disposition?
Yeah, I don't even know. I mean, that's the thing. I don't really remember much prior to me being in acting. Like I started when I was like 5 years old. And one could say that I had a bit of, childhood trauma as far as my mom and dad split when I was like 2, and we moved from my hometown just, a couple hours south of where I am now, kind of thing, to where I live now. And so I don't really remember much from that point. But it's funny because my mom, she actually just told this story the other day, and I guess you could say that there were signs of maybe intelligence a bit early, but it's just kind of one of those like kids say the darndest things type of things. Where I remember she was saying, she laughs about it now, but I guess it was me, my brother at the time, and one of his like local friends in her neighborhood. And so I think she said that, yeah, I probably was like maybe 3 or something like that, 3 or 4, and we were all kind of walking like hand in hand. And I guess she said, what was it now? She said like to us three, she said, "Oh, look, I have 3 handsome men with me." And I said, "No, mom, you have 2 hands and 3 men." So so yeah, I don't know. But yeah, that's then I don't know. I think if anything, me realizing that I was going to be some sort of creative person would have just been me getting into my first acting class. Like I was, you know, it was, yeah, like we just kind of showed up, met somebody, really got into the acting class out of a whim and just like, try it out for something fun to do, which at that age, really all you kind of do in acting class, so to speak, is like play games and improv. And it's more about just kind of being creative, I guess, or like a kid at that point. So probably then, probably when I first started into my acting, it wasn't very long before I got my first job. Like I did like 2 or 3 weeks of acting classes as a kid, and then I booked my first job just off an online casting book. So yeah, I would say probably right around the time that I started into acting would be the major kind of, you know, okay, I'm a creative point.
You've had a spectacular acting career. Spectacular. I know you're like, it was all right.
There'll be more. There'll be more.
As you're acting right now, that you're having a good time, you're like, oh, this is Daniel
Yeah.
again with his big nose. As you can see, the skills haven't left you. Um, Tell us about this experience for you because you had a special childhood. And what was it like to become an actor at such an early age where um how has this changed you and how did it start for you? Because you've met some
Yeah, I mean,
major names in the industry, legends before you were 10 years old. That's super crazy. What was it like for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's definitely um I mean, there's chapters to that even in itself, you know. Obviously when I was super young, when I was first getting into it, I was just a kid, so I was just happy to like not be in school half the time and like be doing something different, right? And having fun. And apparently I would walk around and tell everybody in the world, which I don't really necessarily do anymore, but apparently I was a bit, one might say cocky or whatever. I was a bit of a little prick, I guess, when I was like 7 or 8, because apparently all I'd run around saying is, I'm Cameron and I'm an actor. But I was like 7, so whatever. Um, but no, yeah, I mean, the first few years were definitely, it was kind of one of those things where it was very passive, but I couldn't really tell you how I felt necessarily. It was more like a kid in the candy store at that point, so to speak, where I was just having fun, basically. Like it wasn't work or a job or anything at that point. It was me and my mom, working together, traveling over to Vancouver. I live on Vancouver Island, so it'd be like a full day. I'd be, we'd take the 6 in the morning ferry over and we'd be on the 9, 10 o'clock ferry at night back, right? So it was a full-time thing that I was living with my mom. So who as well, I should say, raised me, by herself, from the age of like 4 up till, I was probably 16, 17 before my dad came back into my life. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, it was just that in itself. But then, it kind of, I would say the turning point as to me really understanding the gravity of what I was doing was probably around the time that I booked, it would be Godsend and Birth. And that was when I was like 9 and 10. And then it was really that, like, there was kind of a 2-year period there where I think I was only in my hometown for like 3 months out of the span of 2 years. And in that 2 years, I had flown out East Ontario to film, and then I was in New York to film, and then I was in China, and then I was in Prague. And so that was really the moment where it was like, okay, this could be a thing. Like literally, this could be a career and so on and so forth. But I think being able to travel and at a young age see that much of the world, more specifically Asia, as far as Hong Kong and Shanghai, where I filmed, it just, I would say that was probably one of the first like big life-changing moments. And it was just simply like culture shock at that point, being able to go somewhere where at the time, my town was probably, oh, I don't know, maybe like 60,000, 70,000 people at the time. And then going to Hong Kong, which is like the same size, land-based as my town, but there's like 5 million people there. And so it was huge, just, made me appreciate where I came from, what I was doing, and then furthermore after that, um, there was personal things that came up about people I'd worked with, where then kind of um, I guess you could say the abuse side or the darker side of the industry came out in my early teens. So like, 14, 15, 16 was kind of a bit of a rough time for me, but it was because again, I was growing up in a crazy world, in a crazy industry that I had no relation to, as far as like my family had never been in movies or the industry. No one in my town had ever been that. There was nobody I could relate to whatsoever. So all of the problems that I was going through, just, growing up in this crazy industry, I really had to tackle them by myself at that time. Because even going to counselors and everything, like they didn't even know what I was going through and they couldn't even understand it. So, now I look back and I understand that they couldn't understand that. But of course, when you're 15 and 16 and you just feel, I guess, alienated or whatnot. But So I'd say those were kind of the tough times in my days, but then I kind of had to learn how to treat my own, problems at that point. So of course, alcohol and drugs and everything kind of came in, and then I had kind of like, well, I don't want to say the glory days because I hope there will be more, but then, I was part of the Twilight series, basically for like, well, I don't know. I think I started on that movie when I was probably 16 or 17 and ended with the whole thing, when I was like 21 or 22. So that was literally like a 5 or 6 year chapter of my life where, again, like as a young teenager, I was just kind of living the life, the quote unquote dream life. Was I happy? Probably not, but I was doing what I thought made me happy at the time, So yeah, I don't know. Like I said, there's a lot of chapters even in the just how did that affect me growing up. But yeah, I guess that's all my brain has right now.
One of the things I find fascinating is how can unsee certain things, can unlearn certain things. How did you cope with the fact of suddenly being different without anybody preparing you for this kind of
I mean,
radical individualism?
I'd say I probably didn't. Like didn't know how to cope with it. Like I said, I kind of got into the partying side of things and, the release of that stuff, because obviously that was kind of the only way that I knew how to cope, sadly was drugs and alcohol and partying and kind of um what's the what am I trying to say here now? Yeah, basically that. It's funny because, even having conversations with you, we've had private conversations, obviously, over the past few years of knowing each other. And the other time we did, a more podcast type thing. I really haven't learned how to do that until recently, because I was there was no time for that, and that's why as well, it's tough for any actor or actress in life as usual just because our industry is one of constant rejection. Like you're constant you audition for 10,000 things and you might book one thing, but you're rejected 9,999 times basically before you get one. So even as an adult, it can mess with someone's mind, let alone being 14, 15, 16 and having nobody to help you through these things. You kind of fall into a bit of like, self-hate and everything because that's more or less what you're programmed to do. You're programmed to look at yourself and be like, well, what did I do wrong? What's wrong with me? Why didn't they pick me? When in reality, the reasons could be whatever, and it might not have anything to do with your skill or your talent or you. They might just have picked somebody else. But of course, as a 15-year-old, you don't understand why it's happening every single time. So it can really beat someone's, I don't want to say their ego, but their, self-esteem and everything, right? And so I didn't really deal with that at all until, probably like the last 10 years of my life. And it was more just because I was too busy, one, either working and I guess being that person. Um, and it is, you have to more or less be that person for other people, like it's interesting. It's funny because not funny, I should say, but I relate now, not I guess myself, because I wouldn't call myself a comedian or anything, but I relate to the fact that a lot of comedians, they suffer from depression and everything, right? But it's that idea of like just because they make people laugh doesn't mean that they're happy or doesn't mean that their life is good. Yet if you see a comedian in the street, 9 times out of 10, you're gonna walk up to them and be like, make me laugh. And they're probably like, go fuck yourself. You know what I mean? Whereas that's like for me, that's how it was, where I was, even to this day, technically, I filmed a movie last year, but I would say I've basically been out of the industry since I was 20. So roughly around 12 years, 10, 12 years, I've been out of the industry. I'm still technically active, but whenever somebody reaches out to me from my past, it one of the very first things they say is, "Are you still acting?" Or "When's the next movie coming out?" And it's that, like, again, 20 years later from the prime of my career, I still have people that clearly think of me as that person instead of just Cameron. They're not like, "Hey, what have you been up to?" It's no, or "Can I see you in a movie?" That's the first thing they want, is they want to be able to see me as an actor rather than, a human being, basically. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It's just an interesting, again, life to grow up in and deal with. And, luckily now it's kind of one of those things, is going back into acting. I feel like my skills and my talent are going to grow kind of exponentially. And it's basically just because I've actually lived life now, a lot of, you know, I mean, of course, there's many different styles of acting, I would say, but 95% of acting is just being able to relate to the situation or the character that you're living. So, or, you're portraying, I should say. So it comes with just life experience. And when I was a kid, I didn't have any of that. I was living the experience rather than had lived it. Where now I've kind of been there, done that. I've had money, I've been broke, I've been poor, I've been famous, I've been not so famous, I've been, kind of everywhere, as far as society would say, next to basically like going to prison and stuff. I've kind of been there, done that with everything in 30 years of life. So yeah, it's at the end of the day, it's just kind of being able to look back and learn from it, I guess, and grow from it, right? And take the bad with the good and learn that, I find that, you know, I think we just talked about this just a few days ago, as I'm kind of going through a new chapter in life as well, personally, that, you know, the bad times are almost some of the best times, because
Yeah.
that's normally where you're
Yeah.
growing up and you're learning, right? And you're self-reflecting, is when everything in your life kind of falls apart. So yeah, I'm just glad that I've been tested before, and so hopefully, I'm more equipped to deal with it this next time around, basically.
Sigmund Freud once said that the struggle will retrospectively strike you as the most beautiful chapters of your life. And it's,
Sorry,
and
two
think one of
seconds.
the,
I think
yeah, no
I
problem.
think my dog just wants to go outside. I'm just gonna let them out. Come on, let's go outside. Come on, let's go outside. Go. Yeah, sorry. Got the new puppy, and he was whining. I said I don't want him peeing all over the house. But yeah.
Yeah,
So
so
yeah, anyways.
Freud was saying that Freud once said that the times of struggle will retrospectively strike us as the most beautiful ones in a way. And I think our society isn't doing a proper job at, I think, reminding people who are going through tough times to also remind them that these are initiation moments. I think that's what we spoke about lately in a way, where I think at least for a man, it also is helpful to go through stuff that you've survived. And I think our modern generation doesn't even integrate for that. And like when my father comes from
Yeah,
an old village, for instance, where scars would be celebrated as somebody who survived a battle,
yeah,
and people were
yeah.
not looked as ugly just because they were imperfect. And in their culture, they even put some sand into the scars to make sure that they stay. And that's something I feel kind of interesting. Um,
Mhm.
Back to the first chapter of your life, though, you've met an extraordinary cohort of people. And when I think of you, it's like you had this circus of unicorns, I feel, that you were traveling around the world with for chapters. what are some lessons you made from the other actors along the way that that hit you home, where during this time it didn't even strike you maybe especially, but many people just would ask, like, what was that like for you to
Yeah.
be in a room with all these icons, so to say, even though it's a strange word
Yeah.
to use.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it wasn't really, and again, it's kind of one of those things where, sadly, you kind of appreciate it after the fact, a lot of the times because, again, I was so young that really like I was just trying to, not mess up basically in front of the likes of, Robert De Niro and Nicole Kidman and so on. And I'm sure at the end of the day that I absorb stuff from them, and that's just by working side by side with them that I probably don't even realize, But I think probably one of the main things that I was just fortunate about is that really you kind of, we what's the word I'm looking for right now? Um we basically like we speak up these people so highly sometimes that between tabloids and media and rumors and whatever that like at the end of the day I was very fortunate that most of the people that I met, even the Robert De Niro's and stuff, like they were pretty just regular people, like, yeah, they're living this crazy life and everything. But back then, I feel like the industry, especially, was such a different vibe, that it was really just people, again, working their craft and having a good time. And so I was just fortunate enough that I didn't have any bad experiences with most people, and if they were, everyone has a bad day, that kind of thing. That was my bad experiences, where there's a lot of, horror stories as far as my industry goes, So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think just, learning from them as far as different tricks of the trade, I probably picked up. But again, I think one of the kind of more, I guess, pivotal people that I met, and it was really just our personal relationship, was either Paul Walker or Patrick Swayze, meeting Patrick at a young
Paul
age,
Walker, the guy
Pat.
from Need for from the
Yeah,
what?
Fast and Furious. So like I was in Running Scared with Paul Walker, and then I actually did a kids movie basically with Patrick Swayze where he played
Yeah.
my dad. And look, Paul Walker was like,
Just this sentence for somebody who's not from the acting world
yeah,
was wild.
yeah,
This one time where Patrick Swayze played my
yeah,
dad. This is what I
yeah,
learned from it.
yeah. Well, and like for me, it was more with Patrick, it was more of it wasn't, the thing is what I would say is what I learned mostly from the people I worked with wasn't necessarily about acting. It was more about living life as an actor, and realizing that you can still just be yourself, like you don't necessarily have to be that crazy person that everyone wants you to be, like Paul Walker was just like a big brother to me. He was just cool. He was just awesome. And then, I truly believe that he is someone that, again, I mean, obviously anyone who dies too early, it's too early, but I feel like that he is someone who could have impacted the world so much greater than he was ever able to just because his life was sadly cut short, Um, and Patrick Swayze was more of like a cautionary tale, like he was
Really?
such an amazing human being, like awesome guy, but he had deep, deep personal troubles. And it was again from him growing up in the life that he grew up in, like the Hollywood days, he when I worked with him, I believe he was probably in his 50s, I want to say. Um, and he had been in the industry since he was like, as far as I know, like in his teens, like 17, 18 kind of thing. And like the amount of loss, the amount of, chaos, the amount of just everything was way more hidden back then, like that was in like the 70s, the 80s, like that's when like men were men and we don't talk about our feelings. And, but he was also a kid who came from that type of a family. He was like his dad and his four brothers were all ranchers. Like they didn't talk about their issues. They didn't talk about their problems. And when he said he wanted to be a ballet dancer, it was like, committing a sin basically, right? So he, but then he was in Dirty Dancing, and that's what made him famous, And it was something that even 40 years later he hid the fact that he enjoyed dancing because it wasn't a manly thing to do, and it's just one of sorry, now of course my dog's barking again. I'll be
Let's
right
take
back.
a little break, Cameron. I also have to go to the toilet, okay?
Gotcha.
Bathroom.
Cool.
You've worked with Paul Walker and Patrick Swayze. That was the last thing we talked about before the
Yeah,
commercial break.
yeah.
And how do you feel about the fact that Paul Walker appeared in movies after he died, pretty much?
Well, it's yeah, I mean it's kind of funny because we actually technically did the same thing that Fast and Furious did with his brother. So there was a scene in Running Scared where basically the shot it's kind of like he goes to investigate a gunshot that happened, and while he's in the like everyone who watched the movie thought it was like an animation, like a CGI cut that we did. But basically what it does is it kind of follows the, what happened, and it goes basically it follows the bullet past him backwards, and you see it go past who you think is Paul Walker. And that was actually his brother. So kind of the same thing that they did with Fast and Furious, where they used his brother to finish off his movie. I thought it was good. At the end of the day, that's what he was doing, and obviously he loved those movies. That those movies were his life for probably I would say the last like 10 years of his life. That's pretty much all he did was those and a few other movies, obviously. Um, but no, I mean, I think they did a good job in doing it, and I mean, obviously it's immortalized because of what it is and who he is, but I think they really kind of put that home as far as, you know, they gave the fans what they wanted, and at the end of the day, I think that's what he would have wanted too. Um, who knows, obviously, but yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me now though as well of the whole AI thing. We've obviously talked plenty about this, but I think Tom Hanks is technically the first actor, well, the first, main or you know, yeah, mainstream, I guess, mainstream actor, big name, who I believe he's signed already the rights to allow whoever to do like four movies at least with his AI likeness after he dies. Um, I think, somewhere in every actor, that's what they enjoy about movies and being in them is, that basically you have your legacy immortalized already through film, especially now in digital. If any of your movies made it to digital, then you're around forever. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that he was someone who, at least my generation, I would say most people were impacted by him in some way. I was a huge fan of the Fast and Furious movies myself. Maybe not so, honestly, maybe not so much since he's been out of them, but I think they got a little redundant after a little while after they did like 25 of them. But
I
but
saw a stream
yeah.
like 2 hours ago of Vin Diesel taking a Lamborghini, jumping from one skyscraper into another, and I'm
Yeah,
like,
so that was about the
that's not
time
how
where
the
I was like,
series started. I'm like,
yeah. I was
yeah,
like, yeah.
okay.
Yeah. As soon as The Rock and Jason Statham joined it, I was like, I don't even want to watch these movies anymore, man. But but no, I think deep down we all want, or I won't say we all want to, we all hope that again, as artists and creators or creatives, that's what you want to do. You want to be able to share your creative side, your content, or your art, or, your life or whatnot. And, I believe most of us hope that that helps somebody through something, or they can relate or whatnot, or they just enjoy it and somehow it makes their day better. So, yeah, I mean, as an actor myself, that's all I can hope for in my legacy or whatnot is that, hopefully, people will enjoy my movies for a long time after I'm gone. Yeah, who knows?
If you would write a book, if a book would be written by many people who've been prominent on fame, what would be a story or a technique that you would add to this book? Not on how to become famous, but on how to deal with it, because you're such a down-to-earth guy and you've been a great friend and mentor of mine for many years, but your art has been viewed by literally hundreds of millions of people, which is kind of insane if you think about it.
Yeah,
Also, to
yeah.
technology, so it seems that this number is gonna get more eyeballs over as
Yeah,
the
well,
humans do.
well, they're re-releasing the Twilight series. They're doing another theater release of all the Twilight movies in like October. So
Oh,
there will
really?
be plenty millions more, I'm sure, on that one. But yeah, no, yeah, I mean, for me, I think the biggest thing that I guess I wish I could have known or thought of or whatnot in my earlier years, and it maybe would have helped me stay with my acting more, steadily at that point, is just before you really do anything in life for anybody else, you need to think about yourself. You need to and of course you could call it being selfish or whatnot, but what I mean by that is if you can't love yourself and you can't love what you're doing or what you're producing or the job you do or anything, then you can't really expect anybody else to follow that either. And that's one of the things now, especially just coming out of, a 10-year relationship and realizing that I never I never gave myself that time. I never gave myself the time to think about what I was doing, think if it was what I wanted to be doing or anything. I just always just kind of like went from one thing to the next relationship to the next to the next. I didn't give myself that time to just learn how to love myself and live with myself. And I think that leads into a lot of the world's pain these days is the fact that people just can't live with themselves. And therefore then they start doing everything for everyone around them. And obviously doing things for other people is good, but when you can't see anybody doing that for yourself or you can't do it for yourself, then are you really going to be happy, you know, exhausting yourself basically for everyone around you? I think that would be my kind of life lesson that I've learned as far as just, yeah, if I was able to have a conversation like this when I was 16, 17, going through all my like child abuse and the pedophilia and whatever and blah blah blah, the industry, that was the one thing is I hated myself. I hated who people thought I was because it wasn't who I actually was. They knew about Cameron Bright, not Cameron Krigger. All they cared about was Cameron Bright. And so because at the heart of it, I didn't enjoy myself or my life, then it just doubled down when I wanted out of it. My only option was to get out of it. It wasn't, oh, stick through it, you'll be fine because you know what you're doing is it makes you happy. Whereas I thought everything I was basically doing was making everyone around me happy and me more miserable. The money I had didn't do anything but allow me to, basically feed my addictions and feed my pain at that point. I had zero guidance really, for anything. My mom tried as hard as she could, but I was a rebellious teenager who had, six-figure bank account and, you know, n- no guidance, no real mentors. Like, yes, obviously I worked with amazing people, but again, I've kind of, I think I've mentioned it to you before, but the acting industry is very weird in the fact that you're in such a bubble for, X amount of time when you're working, especially, when you're in literally like a foreign country. Like when I was in China, you're even in more of a bubble with the people that you're working with. And you live and work with these people like every single day, all day for 2 to 3 months. So you make these crazy, like, flash relationships where you get to know people like really deeply because again, like you don't have anybody else to talk to. At that point, those are the only people you can relate with. After your work that day, you normally go home and hang out with the people you're working with because you're in a foreign city or a foreign country, or you're just somewhere where you don't know anybody else. But then 9 times out of 10, that when that job is done, you're probably never going to see those people again. And so it's very strange way to grow up as far as, yeah, I would say that I had all these mentors. I probably could have reached out to Robert De Niro and stuff like that. But in my mind, I'm like, Robert De Niro doesn't care about me. You know what I mean? He's got bigger fish to fry, right? So I still felt alienated after I left set, especially for me then as a kid too, where like I couldn't go out with the crew when I was 13 years old, 14 years old, and everyone else would go back to the hotel. Well, they go down to the hotel bar and have some drinks because they're adults. Well, I was stuck in my room alone by myself playing video games, so that was kind of my, you know one of my main teachers in life was video games. Like it's funny even now to this day, and my mom and stuff all like drop like history on her, and she'll be like, "Where'd you learn that?" I'll be like, "A video game," and she'll be like, "Oh, like you learn things from those," and I'm like, "Yes, mom." Like, I'm like, I'm not sitting around playing Fortnite. It was like, back in the day for me, I was playing like World War II history based games. I was playing Age of Empires, things like that that are, yeah, they're video games, but what they're based off of is are true events, So I think in life, that's kind of what got me into learning or wanting to learn, I guess I should say, about, history and everything, because yeah, you know, we are creatures of habit. And history repeats itself every day, right? So if you can learn from anything, learning from your past or learning from someone else's, uh what am I trying to say, life or experiences, is one of the easiest ways to kind of figure out the world around you, in my opinion. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, long story short, I would say that that is what I would, my 2 cents in a encyclopedia of how to live being in the spotlight in any way, is just being, comfortable with yourself and your choices and your decisions, because then, who cares what anybody else thinks, right? So yeah, that's what I would
Do
say.
you think two things? First of all, I love the fact that you mentioned the fact that video games ha helped you in your journey of maturation. It's like one of the things I feel is really useful is to study history from a ego player perspective, as if you're a participant in it from both
Hmm.
sides in a way, and
Yeah.
like video games do a great job of it. And in regards to the environment of this just traveling uh, circus, do you, if you could travel back in time to the Cameron who couldn't go down and have the drinks with all these other guys, is what would be a piece of advice you would give yourself back then on what you know right now after a decade of digesting this crazy journey that you had there?
Like, sounds funny to say, and I'm probably because now I'm in my 30s now, but it's just, life moves on. Don't worry. You're 12. You'll figure it out. This isn't the end of the world there, big guy. But yeah, no, for me, obviously it was difficult as well being, just a male in that life, not really having, my dad in my life, right? Not having that kind of father figure. Of course, we can always look back and, there's always going to be the coulda, woulda, shouldas. But yeah, I don't know. I don't, it's funny because you kind of, we everyone always mentions the whole time capsule thing and what, what would you tell your 10-year-old self? And I don't know, you know, at the end of the day, I think it would be something as simple as kind of what I just said, just don't don't worry so much about the people around you, or at least people's opinions, I should say. Obviously, you want to care about the people around you, but yeah, I don't know, it's just kind of that. We're just try and enjoy it, Obviously, there's times where you're gonna hate, whatever you're doing in life. I feel like, it's very hard for anyone to find true happiness, but yeah, I think it would have just been that in itself, just make sure to take care of yourself, before worrying about other people,
Do you
because
think
again,
a doses of self-hate is necessary to achieve extraordinary things?
I think you kind of have to go through those times. I mean, I don't know anybody who has loved themselves or their life every day of the week, I'd love to meet one of those people. But yeah, it's yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm definitely one of those people where like, life is just that. It's life. It's never gonna be perfect. There's always good with the bad, and you have to learn how to deal with all of that. I look at very much so. I look at, the youth today and, not to get too far into it, obviously, but the participation badge way of today, Um, and then sadly, again, not to get too far into it, but then we have, the days of the school shooters and these days where you have these young adults that are in their 20s who have almost been given too much freedom and too much niceness, whatever, kindness, because then when they turn 21 or 22 and they're felt they have to deal with true adversity in their life, they don't know how to handle it. And then that's when this rage and this outrage and this hate and everything comes, because they haven't dealt with that for the first 20 years of their life, because everyone nowadays just walks people through things, they don't have to deal with bad grades in school because grades are basically not irrelevant now. It's like it's just certain things that, sadly enough, life can be shit. So if you don't deal with any of that, you know um, it's gonna mess with you. And it kind of leads me back. I'll try and be brief about it, but I remember watching this show. Can't remember exactly what it was about, but it was basically about the Mexican mafia and like MS-13 and blah 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 blah. But what they were doing is they were talking to this ex-member who, had been through the whole gang life for 30, 40 years and was now trying to help, show people that there's a way out and there's a life after it. But he was talking about when he moved to the States first. And I think he said that he came from like Guatemala or something like, somewhere crazy down south that was super cartel, blah, blah, blah. He moved to the United States as like a 12 or 13-year-old, and he was talking about trauma at that point. And he was like, it was wild being that person that came from where I came from at that age and then being implanted into like suburb America, you know, and a 12-year-old that he would be dealing with the worst, maybe possibly the worst trauma in their life was that like a grandparent had died. That at that point in that 12-year-old's life, that was probably the worst thing that had ever happened to them, if that had ever even happened to them. Where he came from, somewhere where he was like, by the age of like 5 or 6, I would see people strung up by their necks with cartel messages on them. And he's like, and I was completely desensitized to that. So now you put me in suburb America where some kid bullies me, and he's like, I have no problem pulling out a knife and trying to stab him, because for me, that's normal. That's how you deal with an issue. That's how you deal with a bully. You take them out. But that for him, it was normal, right? And it was listening to that. I was like, man, that is so wild, because again, He was just a 12-year-old kid. And literally the only difference between that 12-year-old kid and the suburb America 12-year-old kid was literally just where they grew up. And that completely changed them, completely changed their outlook on life. You talk about bad things to that guy, and he's like, well, you know, being broke isn't so bad. At least you're alive, like something like that, right? So you know, I've always kind of remembered that story and what that guy said, because again, for me, growing up, the worst thing that happened wasn't really that crazy. But then I had issues in my life. But again, trauma to someone is trauma. The losing a grandparent as a child versus seeing literal bodies of people as a child, it's still the worst trauma you have in your life. So you're going to have trauma no matter what it is, even if it's just losing a loved one. Sadly, as of now at least, unless you're uh Putin or Xi Jinping or whatever, I guess we have clocks on our life. but but no, so yeah, I think that obviously it's never going to be easy. But again, it kind of with me having just separated from like a 10-year relationship, you know, forcibly going through trauma or going through shitty times is kind of one of the things I think that we all need to do, because again, like it's it's the other side that is the victory. It's like, yeah, if you're able to wade through the nonsense and get to the other side, then that's where the enlightenment comes, or the better days, so to speak. Hopefully, I guess one should say. Especially just being here, living, where I live, there's a lot of addiction problems and everything. And it's the same thing, right? Where sometimes these people, no matter what happened in their life, whether it's trauma or mental disease or homelessness or anything, they can never seem to get out of it. And it's,
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's their fault or anything, but then there's those other people that they just deal with it and they get through it. They do whatever it takes possible to turn their life around. And one can easily look at that population and say, why does only 1% make it out? Why isn't there more people that are able to beat addiction and everything? But I think, again, it leads back to our psyche and the way that we deal with things. And a lot of those people can't do much for themselves. They feel they get too used to, leeching off the system or just being in that rut and constantly hating yourself and saying, why doesn't anybody want me, or why, like, I don't deserve to be here, I don't deserve this. I think it all comes from, again, a self-hate or a self-love aspect, right? So yeah.
I just heard a story of like, do you know the guy who played the kid in Terminator? What was his name?
um like the original one, you mean, right? The
Yeah, not
first
not the
Terminator.
not the
I'm
diluted
like,
ones where they
I
just
I want to say I almost feel like I heard that too, but I'm gonna look him up
there
real
was a
quick so you
famous
guys.
story of that guy, for instance, where I think he was playing the son of Sarah Connor.
Yeah.
I think, and he had an addiction problem too, and he was going to partying, and what was his name? I need this guy's name, but anyway,
Yeah, I'm going on IMDb
he
right now,
had
so I'll tell
he
you
had
two
he had
seconds.
an overdose in a club and woke up and the lights were on and it made it to the newspaper and he lost the next deal for him
Yeah.
and it was and he lost like $20 million. It was some crazy number like this.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I
And
can believe
and
it for sure.
and how did you snap out of addiction? Because it's been a part of my chapter as well. And I think like I'm always have the greatest respect for people who overcome themselves also and who tame the demons that reside within their own psychic house. Like if you would go back in time and
Yeah.
it's a very unusual situation where if you as a teenager have prominence, prosperity, and power to some degree, and it comes to you so early and before you've created the character around it. How did you get yourself out of that stage of your life?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because it's like I don't even know at that point, it's like I think it was just having, it was just having to face it at the end of the day. And, you know, sadly, I think for myself, it was the loss of friends that really kind of snapped me out of it. I was fortunate enough that I was never really, I would say, addicted to any like hard drugs or anything. Um, I have my vices and I definitely partied back in the day, but I was never one to, lock myself in a room and go on a binger basically, right? Where I knew plenty of people, in my hometown that did that. And then further down the road when I would, travel to LA and everything, um, I had a lot of friends and friends of friends that didn't make it out of their 20s, like Disney kids and stuff that went through, all the craziness of that world. And but it's yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think at the end of the day it's that where I just kind of had to, to a certain degree I had to hit rock bottom as well. And I would say I did that a few years back. Like luckily, I had my ex at the time, and now she helped me through a lot because it was throughout my 20s that really I did my kind of discovery and stuff. But I think it was really just kind of having those conversations with myself about, what it is, but I kind of had to come out of that fog of like fame at the end of the day. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
It must be strange also to I've written articles about psychology online for many years now. I've never had any real prominence to the degree you did, but it's very strange if people write me emails from the internet about and connecting with an iteration of myself that I was maybe 3 years ago. It's super strange for me to because I have like nothing in common with the person who wrote that. How do you deal with the fact that people have this projection of this idea of like you're that guy and not really wanting to get to know who you are right now, but more like the idea that they have and the illusion that they have in their mind of who you're supposed to be.
Yeah. Um, well, yeah, I mean that's the thing is it's something that I didn't really come to until, again in my 20s and stuff. And I think it was really when I stepped back from acting and it was very much more the fact of like making that statement that I was just, myself. I didn't have to be that person for everyone around me. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tough question because I feel like I'm still doing that. I feel like that's the thing is like one of my, it becomes a lifelong task at the end of the day is dealing with, the life that I've lived. It never really goes away, like even in my relationship that I just got out of, one of the main issues in it is my past. And it's not my past as far as what I did personally. It's just the fact that anytime someone around me, like even my brother was messaging the other day that people that he knows from his childhood ask more about me than they do him when he runs into them. Like that kind of thing, right? Where like it's put trauma and basically hate or jealousy in within my family. And that's not even something that I do. It's literally something that other people do. But when they talk to him, they want to hear about me. They don't even care about him, right? So, and it's like, that's not my fault. It's not like, sorry, I was in movies, like, but, so it'll never turn off. I'll always be dealing with, that side of my life and dealing with people asking questions about it and everything. So I think it's constantly I don't want to say a battle or anything, but it's constantly I would say almost a struggle as far as like an identity struggle. And I think that's why at least now through what I've done after the fact, especially crypto, where it's like I can kind of with crypto, it was nice because I could use my past life to create a new life, more or less, you know, where everything else, it's the exact opposite. It's like I will, no matter how hard I try to just do my own thing, I will still always be just that actor kid, you know? Um, so it's, yeah, it's interesting, you know, but I think those are probably struggles that a lot of people have, you know, as far as especially these days, I would say, as far as identity and who they really are and what they really want to be, you know. Um, I mean, obviously, with all the, you know, stuff going on in youth and everything these days with transitioning and so on and so forth, you know, to each their own. Anyone can do what they want with their bodies. But again, there are these stories of, you know, children literally making these very serious life decisions as far as what they want to do with their body or to their body. And then they're 25 and they're like, why the hell did anyone tell me that I should have done this? Because now there's no going back. And I was 12 and I had no clue who I was, you know? So I guess I'm just fortunate that for me, it wasn't a life-altering decision. It was more just something that, you know, again, I hope I can learn from and grow and use in the next, you know, phase of my life, right? And you know, really like wear it as armor at that point, you know, where yeah, if yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's always interesting. But yeah.
What do you think is a nexus event of your life where, a la Spider-Man, where losing his uncle and
Yeah.
or like developing some form of superpowers or super weaknesses? What's the moment where you feel that hit
Yeah,
you
well, I think I
harder
mean
and
it.
it altered the personality of yours?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main event that really happened in my life, and it would definitely be from a trauma side of it, was when I found out that so like I worked on the butterfly effect when I was 7. I know I've mentioned this to you before, but for anyone listening, when I was 7, I was in a movie called Butterfly Effect, which strangely enough starts off basically based about well, not basically, it's based about pedophile or pedophilia. Um, well, of course, when you're a child on set, you have tutors on set. We ended up befriending the tutor, like my mom and I. And I spent like 7 years. I would go over to his house. I was at his house for Christmas one time, that kind of stuff. He was, you know, at the time I didn't have a father in my life or a father figure in my life, I should say. Um, and so he was that kind of father figure to me at the time. And then fast forward to when I was 14, I was filming elsewhere in Canada here, and we got a call from the RCMP, which is our like federal police force kind of thing. Um, Basically, wherever anywhere doesn't have their own police, there's the RCMP, so they're everywhere, all over Canada. So I got a phone call from a Vancouver RCMP detachment, and it was about the guy in question, the tutor, and he had 18 cases of child molestation against him. And there was things that had happened that instantly that was the flood of like, oh God, you know, those things that I was kind of like, is this right? You know, were proven to not be right. Fortunately, in that situation, I wasn't abused physically all that much. There were other kids involved with him that were definitely more abused than I was, I would say. But for me, it was the mental side. It was the fact of the betrayal, you know, and then furthermore, it was the why me, you know, was it just because I was that actor or whatever, or was he trying to groom me? Was that a thing, you know? And that's when really like everything changed, you know. That's when the fame became more of a burden. That's when my life became more of a burden, because obviously I was dealing with so much behind the scenes, but then I still had to put on that smiling face and be that person for everyone in front of me. That really like my struggle started, I would say. And then that's when the self-reflection, it was a few years I was, you know, got into alcohol and drugs and everything around the age of like 14. Like grade 8 for us is when I got into all that stuff. And you know, it advanced to harder stuff, and that's when there was a point where the partying luckily in my point, it didn't ever turn into a bad thing, but for me, the partying, it became less of a party. And instead, whenever I was high on whatever substance, I would just talk about life and talk to people and talk about things. And that's where my crazy, you know, inebriated drug mind would go, was into the like self-reflection. I would sit in the corner at a party and be high as hell, just being like, what am I doing with my life? Um, and then even furthermore, like that is something that I deal with. I wish I could say that I didn't think about that guy in question at least once a month. I would think, I hope, even now to this day, my mom absolutely hates herself for that. She believes she gave her child to the devil, basically. She was the one that said, sure, go over to this guy's house. I trust him, and so on, right? And so it didn't just affect me and my life, it affected her life. It still does to this day. Um, and obviously, it affected a lot more people's lives that were involved with him. But again, I'm just glad that I came out and I'm here and I'm able to have these conversations with, people like yourself, because yeah, just as easily not be here. I could just as easily be dead. I could just as easily be, God knows where, broken, on the streets or whatnot, right? So, yeah, I think if anything, that is the one moment that I'm able to look back on and look at how it has affected my life over the years, and really hopefully I've learned the most from that, and really about more about myself, and again, how to love myself and not look for that. Sadly enough, maybe if I wasn't looking for a father figure at that time, then I wouldn't have had that. But did I need a father figure at that point? Who knows? Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, that's the one. I mean, I'm sure there's others if I thought about it, but like I said, the one moment that has had the most impact on my life, whether it's good or bad or both or everything in between, that's the moment for sure.
Um, I've written some books about trauma, and trauma is a really expensive psychological phenomenon because your many different belief systems collapse at the same time, and they stay collapsed until rebuilt, until
Mhm.
certain answers has been found. And one of the most difficult ones in regards to trauma is abuse, I feel. And
Mhm.
particularly when people try to find an answer to the question, why me? And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
why did
Well,
why
it's one of the
didn't why
worst
why
mental
why
things ever for sure. Yeah, it's like
yeah. And that's like
because
usually
they're
people, yeah, exactly.
because it's something that there's no answer for. Like there really is no answer for it. And well, I mean, he would probably have an answer for me, but I'm never going to learn that and I don't want to learn that answer. But yeah, like I said, and like I said, it's come out obviously more now as well, that abuse itself comes in many different ways. And for me, like I said, I wasn't necessarily physically abused all that much at from him, but the mental abuse was just as bad, and or not even, if not even worse, I should say. Um because then, yeah, like again, I who knows, maybe therapy would have helped at that time, maybe counseling would have helped at that time. I did actually end up, I think when I was around 15 or 16, going to counseling. We had like a free kind of just like youth outreach center in my hometown, so I started going there, and that again, it was just nice to be able to talk about whatever at the time, right? um I'll always remember, actually, and maybe this was another moment when I kind of realized that my thought process was a bit different than most people my age. Was uh My counselor had asked me randomly one time. She was just like, so this is something that she was like, I asked this to all the kids that come in here, and of course I was, probably one of the only kids that was only there for my own shit going on, where all the other kids were like, little shitty kids. They were like skipping school and doing drugs and stealing cars or whatever, you know. They were just kind of those people that then they were like, you need to go to counseling to work out your issues. Where I was there like voluntarily. I just wanted to go and have someone to talk to that wasn't a family member or anything, you know, just that third party that could just listen, right? And so she was like, I ask everybody this. And she was like, if you were to wake up one day and your life was perfect or the day was perfect, what would that look like? And as like a 15-year-old, I was like, well, I was like, every day that I wake up, my life is perfect. My day is perfect. But then I walk out my bedroom door and I'm in the real world and nothing's perfect, you know? And it like, she was speechless because she was like, no child, no teenager has ever said anything remotely like that. They're like, oh, my life was perfect. I'd have a Ferrari and I'd have 100 grand and gold chain, but and they start listing off these dream world things that they have. But even at the age of 15, I was like, that's just unrealistic. And it was like Jesus, like, why are you saying these things? Just be normal, quote unquote, right? But again, I think that was because at that time I was in an industry, I was in somewhere where really like I was a prisoner to my own thoughts, more or less, because nobody around me understood. So even if I tried to explain what was going on in my life, you know, especially about the trauma I was going through. If I tried talking to my mom about it, she didn't even want to hear about it because it obviously affected her too. So there was no like, oh, mom, this is what I'm going through, because she'd be like, I don't, because she felt she was the one to blame. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I don't even remember what question you asked me now, but I'm gonna have an emotional hangover after this one. I already know.
Well, I can see sometimes you don't answer me after our calls, and I feel like I
Yeah.
am partly to
Oh
blame.
my
As
God, damn,
like,
leave me alone for
talking
like a
to that
week,
guy
man.
comes with a price. No, but it's
No, well, it's funny because I'm actually going to be doing another podcast in a couple weeks here that is all about mental health and everything too. And so this is a good warm up, a good warm up for getting into it with other people too that I don't know as well. I have no problem chatting with you because I love you and you're an
yeah,
amazing person. And that's the thing, is talking with you about it, someone who understands maybe not the acting side of it, but you understand the mental side of it and the
yeah.
just add the psychology behind it, right? So it's like, having conversations with you, I love it because it helps me bring it out and think about this stuff that maybe I haven't really thought about before.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I would love to also hear from you the price of a shortened childhood. Carl Jung once said, "Beware of unearned wisdom." And I feel when you maybe it's also necessary for human development to have our phases, and maybe it's not only a gift to achieve tremendous fortune or fortune, regarding of what you define as fortune
Hmm.
at such an early age. I remember, for instance, I was going to child counseling as well when my father got shot. And I
Hmm.
remember that this was a moment that I can't really put it in practice, but a lot of the things that are important for children were just not of any relevance to me whatsoever. And it shortened
Yeah.
the period in which play was
Yeah,
interesting
you
to me, you know?
the
The wall
innocence.
changed, the bubble
Yeah.
popped. The bubble
Yeah,
popped. That's how it
you're
was to me.
you were robbed of your innocence at that point, right? The ignorance is bliss ended at that moment, and that's kind of, it was the
Yeah.
same thing with me where I had no problem being that happy-go-lucky actor just out there living life until that event happened. It was related to the industry I was in, and I had no one to relate to. So then all of a sudden, all of these things in my life that up until that moment were amazing, they became my crutch, basically, right? Or not my crutch, they became my pain, and my burden to carry at that point, which it should have never been that way. And that's why now when I have my friends ask me like, oh, how can I get my kid into acting and stuff, right? One of the first things I tell them is I was like, you need to think deeply and really hard about, is this right for my child? Because they won't be able to make that decision for themselves, and it can easily go a very bad way, you know, because that's what happened to me. Anytime you put your child out there for anything, one of the people I lived with in my early teens, or sorry, late teens, early 20s, Sammy, she was like like a sister to me. We actually met at a comic convention when I think I was there for like X-Men or something. I think it was even before, or was it during no, I think I'd been in Twilight. But anyways, she was a Suicide Girl. I don't know if you know the Suicide Girls at all. I know there's a few from Germany, but but they're like like an alternative girl, tattooed girls, that kind of thing, pinup girls, blah blah blah. Well, there was a booth of
We called
Suicide
him
Girls.
we called him emos. Yeah.
Well, yeah, alt girls, emo girls, same thing.
We had like a
Well, not same
Tokyo
thing, I
Hotel
should say,
band
but
that sparked
yeah.
like a whole generation
Oh
of
God.
girls falling in love with like yeah,
But yeah,
it was a trend here.
I but yeah, so we met each other at an event. And it was funny because we instantly kind of hit it off, but her background was actually figure skating. She was like a really, really accomplished figure skater growing up, to the point where she worked on like cruise ships and stuff. So she, even though it wasn't necessarily limelight fame being in movies, she was still a very like compartmentalized child growing up in a very weird world where basically her parents were her coaches, and the opportunities for her to be abused or anything were vast. She was not living with parents, she was living with guardians, just certain things that, again, we just related because we were just those young children going through something that is sort of that kind of unicorn or unique thing where maybe only 1% or less of the world is ever going to achieve that level, you know? And it's one of those things where it's very rare that you're going to find someone that you can relate to on that level. And luckily we had each other at that time, or I had her, because yeah, I knew her through that period in my life, my 16, 17, 18, 19, when I was really going through that stuff. And even being able to have conversations with her and have her say, well, yeah, that's different, but listen to this. And being, it was like, like she gets it. So yeah, and that's the thing, is that's just anyone trying to put their kid out there in anything. You're putting them at risk. And so, yeah, like,
I have to
it's
let's
difficult,
hold your talk. I have a big question afterwards. Let's take a
Yeah, you're
small
good.
break for 1 minute and
Yeah.
come back, and I have this question. Okay?
Cameron, welcome back.
Thank you.
For those who don't know, this is recorded with a little time delay because me, in my infinite technical talent, made a mistake at the last interview, and we are recording part of it. So if this is a little bit out of momentum, the blame belongs in my corner of the ballpark, so to say. Yeah, let's move to the next question and to the last part of the interview. It's a little bit about the future and about time. So my first question would be, I think one of the things fascinating about you is that you have your life, like you've lived so many different lives through your movies. And one of the questions would be like, what advice would you give to a younger version of yourself, and also what version of you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's always kind of hard, hindsight is 2020, of course. But no, yeah, I don't know. Kind of the stereotypical, like, just, hang in there. It was more, I'd say it would be more like, kind of 16, 17-year-old me was when I was going through probably the most, mentally and emotionally and all that fun stuff. Um, so yeah, I don't know, just a friendly reminder to take care of myself, and not kind of worry about the world so much, be a little bit more selfish, I guess, would have been, the tip to myself, I guess. Because yeah, especially at that age, I felt, I should say, like I was doing a lot for everyone around me and not necessarily much for myself. So yeah, I'd say that, you know, be a bit more selfish, take care of myself, and just, be happy with myself, because at that point in time, I wasn't necessarily, so yeah, I don't know. Long story short, that'd be about it.
One of the things I find fascinating about you is when you leave the tribe a little bit and you success compounds or resources suddenly find themselves in your lab. I can also imagine lots of people ask you for stuff. Any advice for people who suddenly come to money in regards to or sun or any kind of other resources, how to deal with those situations?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. It's kind of situational, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure everyone who's had any kind of money will tell you that that's when, again, I would say if you come into money and everything, still just be true to yourself, because it gets easy to, just kind of do shit for other people. Like I remember helping people with money and everything back in the day when I had it. And I never saw that back, I never saw that respect back. I never saw, when I was in time of need, I never once, if anything, the people that I helped when they were in need were the ones who completely ignored me when I was in need, So, yeah, again, it would just not, I mean, I guess at that point, don't be selfish, but, you know, just, yeah, watch out for kind of those bad people because that's when, sadly, whenever we gain anything in life that somebody else feels that they need or want, generally they try and get it from you, so just, yeah, just be careful and watch out for those people that, are really just trying to use you for, your money or your fame or whatever it is, whatever it is basically that you have that they don't have, right? You know, just kind of a sad fact of life, I guess, at that point. But yeah, yeah, that's
I
probably what I would
recently
say.
read Cameron. I think it was Hemingway who said it. It was like there are only two tragedies to life: is to not getting what you want and getting what you want. And it feels
Yeah.
that if you could send back to in time to people who are having their first big breakthrough, a little package, some advice or maybe some tools or whatever to help them to prepare what's about to come. Any particular ingredient that on top of the mind that you would like to add to that? Because I
No.
certainly know that I couldn't even even
I mean,
handle
it's one
what's
of
about
those
to.
things where it's like, again, like who knows? It's going to be different for everyone dealing with that, but I can guarantee that, whenever you have, again, like I said, whenever it's I don't know, I mean, and that's just goes back to like human nature and jealousy and greed and all that fun stuff because yeah, it's like, again, like money especially, I've always kind of said it that like money never buys happiness, but it buys comfort, and freedom. And so it's one of those things where, you know, having a bunch of money can just be as much of a burden as anything. A lot of people think that, money solves everything and they'll be happy as long as they're rich and so on and so forth. And that definitely is not the case. It kind of comes back to just again loving yourself and enjoying yourself no matter what you have in life. It's kind of funny. It reminds me of a song lyric actually, um, from Classified. He's the Canadian hip hop kind of rapper guy that has been around forever. I've been listening to him since like elementary school, basically. But in one of his songs, he basically talks about, that in itself as just, taking care of yourself, basically. But he talks about how, you know, a homeless guy in the street, that has absolutely nothing except, a tall can and a couple beers could be one of the happiest people you'll ever meet in life, yet the person next to him that has everything could be the most miserable person you've ever seen, right? And that is something, especially in my industry, in the film industry, that you run into all the time is the fake, um, basically just the fake life, and every, you never see people's issues. That's always behind closed doors, right? So you can, appearances are everything. You can see people, especially these days with social media and filters and all that bullshit, that it's like, it's very easy to pretend to be happy, but it's very hard to actually be happy, no matter what you have. So, yeah, again, just focus on yourself and focus on your happiness and try and find what makes you happy, and the cheaper that is, the better. Pretty much.
Yeah, it's any story that comes to mind where you met somebody from the outside, had the perfect life, but was fucking absolutely miserable behind it.
I mean, yeah, I mean, pretty much everyone in the film industry. But no, yeah, I mean, that's, I mean, I saw it a lot, not to name names specifically, obviously, but I saw it a lot when I was down in LA, right? Where you would have these younger kids who, grew up super rich and famous, have $1 million houses or like multi-million-dollar houses and shit like that, yet they just do drugs constantly and, don't enjoy their life at all, and of course, I don't know, LA is one of those places as well that, I mean, basically 99% of people down there are just like, you know, they're out to gain off other people, So it's just a terrible place. And that's very much that thing where it's all appearances, Look at half the television that comes out these days is all, scripted, drama, right? Where it's like even 90% of the shows that we watch, they're staging fights and everything just for people's entertainment, right? Like I remember I was filming it must have been my TV series, I think, Motive, but we were at like the one of the film studios in Vancouver, and it was hilarious because it was like, probably around now. I think it was like October, November, something like that. And it was like a super shitty, rainy day. And whoa, Jesus, Doc, settle down. And I remember seeing like I was in, the parking lot kind of thing or whatever, like on the sound stage, not inside, but outside. And out of nowhere, I see this lady like in, stripper, like 4-inch heels, wearing a bathrobe, all done up, walking from a trailer into another room. And I was kind of like, the hell are they filming? I was like, is there porno being filmed in this place or something? But it ended up, someone was like, no, it's the Real Housewives of Vancouver. And I was like, wait, what? And they were like, they're filming their B-roll right now. So all these chicks were wearing like bikinis because 6 months earlier, when they filmed quote unquote scene, they were sitting around a pool in their fucking bikinis. So the lady's like in the middle of a sound studio in her bikini, acting like she, is talking about an event that happened 10 minutes before that, right? So it's, it's even just our entertainment, everything's fake, and it's all appearances these days. So, yeah, I mean, it's a tough thing to avoid, and it's a tough thing to,
What do you make of
deal
Cameron?
with, I
Like one of
guess.
the things I find interesting was like it's you one of the wisest friends I've ever had in my life, and I feel that one of the reasons for that is that you can look through illusions that still feel real to somebody like me, for instance, because you have been
Yeah.
on both sides of the narrative, so to say. What do you make of this new trend where it seems to me that there's a new form of entertainment on YouTube, for instance, where people are no longer just acting in movies, but they live in a state where they are the character. The what's the name? The Liver King, for instance. I just
Yeah.
saw where you're making money with the fact of being this over the top of persona that never really existed, and now
Yeah.
you have to be that person. What do you make of that weird development for society?
I mean, yeah, they're basically con men, right? But that's the thing, is that's what's crazy, is we've basically built that, like I said, with Instagram and social media, there's almost like the memes and jokes about it, about how, you meet someone on Instagram or through social media, and then you meet them in real life and they look like they basically don't even look the same. But I think it's just, again, it's almost human nature at that point where I think it comes down to, again, the fact that most people don't love themselves. They don't like the way they look. They don't like who they are. They don't, they have to hide that, or they feel the need to hide that, just to fit in. So I think it comes down to, again, I feel like we talked about it prior in our other conversation, but it was like, it's the individuality. Like, there is no individuality, and then people feel like they need to make up their individuality basically so that they can fit into a group. So they're not being an individual at all. They're instead, changing their body or changing their fit. It kind of reminds me of like plastic surgery these days, obviously, but I remember it was like, well, I think it's Brazil or something like that. Like, Brazil is basically one of those countries that, like, by the age of 16, most of their women are getting, like, acid, like fake butts and stuff like that. But it's because if if a Brazilian chick makes it to 18 and doesn't have an ass, then she's not technically Brazilian, because all they have is big ass. But it's like, well, you're basically saying that you're going to deface your body just so that you can be the stereotypical person that you're supposed to be. So I don't know, it's just the way we are as humans, I guess. I don't know. I wish I could explain it, but I can't.
There's, for those people who want to read a little bit up on this, there's a book called Supernatural Stimuli. I forgot whose psychologist wrote it, but they have this interesting study where there's like birds in a nest, and they have like seagulls who have a red dot on their nose, and the birds, like, they scream for food and pick whenever there's dots, and they appeared make studies where this big dot goes bigger, and they found that these little birds lose their minds, for instance, almost entirely in proportion to how bigger this thing is. So in some sense, I think we've gotten too good at pushing our own buttons and satisfying deeper urges of ourselves that usually have been very, very moderate.
Yeah.
As a visionary, man, it's like for people who don't know, one of my first things I was fascinated by you is like, you have like this popcorn brain. You have always ideas popping up left and right. What are some predictions you have for what's about to happen next? Some can be some images, some fears. If you
Well, I
tap the
saw
antennas, Alex
Alex,
Jones
Alex,
style.
I was gonna say Alex Jones said World War IV is coming. So I was
I
like,
didn't understand that
I was like,
video.
when did World War III happen? I was like, what did
I watched that
was like,
video,
what
and
did
I
I
was to say
miss, man?
I was confused also. I was like,
I was like,
okay.
what did I miss here, man? But yeah, no, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of one of those things, like, we're dealing with a lot here in Canada, as the world is. Um, So it's, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wish I could say good things are coming, but who knows? I think at the end of the day, I'm definitely a believer in that, humanity will prevail, and hopefully the good prevails. But, there's a lot of crazy shit going on, and there's a lot of evil in this world. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I would say, if anything, we can probably look back to the past and kind of tell what's going to be happening in the future here, probably. I can imagine in 10 to 15 years, there's probably going to be another war in the Middle East. That shit's always happening. But no, no, it's kind of one of those things where I'm glad to see, I highly doubt anything, will actually figure itself out, but I'm glad to see there's progress being made with the whole Israel and Gaza thing. And, hopefully next up is, the Russia Ukraine thing. And yeah, I don't know, we just need to pull our heads out of our asses as humans. But yeah, I don't know. I would like to, I'm one of those people where I try not to look too forward to the future, because you just never know what's going to go down these days. But, yeah, hopefully good things, you know. But yeah, I'm kind of ignorance is bliss at that point because yeah, who knows?
Yeah, I feel you. I feel the more I get involved, the more miserable I become. It's like I'm not sure how to deal with that fact in a way. Anyway, let's move on more to the later part of this interview because I know you have a lot going on. I asked you this last time, but it was cut out. What were like three books or movies that had a particular impact on creating Cameron as the iteration that I am seeing in front of me right now?
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny. I feel like, I didn't really read that much as a kid just because I was never a reader. Plus, I was always like reading scripts and everything. So I was just being lazy, I guess you could say. But sorry, I gotta fly. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I used to read, it's funny now that I think about it. I used to read it's called Hank the Cow Dog. He was like a detective dog. That was when I was younger. I loved those books, and who knows, maybe that had something to you know, do with my curiosity or my like I like to think I'm a bit of a I don't want to say a detective, but I'm that kind of a person. Like I'm a problem solver, I guess you could say, so on and so forth. So who knows? Maybe that book had more of an impact on my brain than I thought, but couldn't tell you now. But I do remember I can't remember
You also mentioned
what.
once that in our previous convo where the camera was not on, that you were on set always a big. You said you always were listening to everybody, what everyone is
Oh
doing,
yeah, yeah.
watching people get fell asleep.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a people watcher. I do that even just like when I'm on the bus or something. I'm an eavesdropper. But yeah, no, I think,
In a
I think
professional
that
sense, right? Not a stalker. I'm joking.
yeah, no, no, not in a creepy way, just in a what the hell are these guys talking about way. But no, yeah, I mean that's kind of all I could really do on set, like there was so much going on that it's kind of like when people say they want to be a fly on the wall, right? Well, I was the fly on the wall basically every day on set. So that was kind of, I would say that I'm one of those people too, where I'm a very visual learner. Again, like I would probably more times than not rather like listen to a book than read it. I'm definitely like, you know, if there's pictures, then I'm good. But words, not so much. But no, yeah, I mean, there was another book though that, and I don't know if I'd necessarily say that it, you know, I mean, it probably did at the time impact me more, but I can't remember the name of it. It's like the it was like the curious case of the murder of the dog in the night. I don't know. It was a weird name, but it was shoot, I probably read it in like my early teens. I want to say maybe like 13, 14. But it was based on a kid with autism who was trying to figure out how his like neighbor's dog died or something like that. And that was a super interesting book, just the way that it was written. It was very much like POV, like through the eyes of this autistic kid. So it was just like certain things, like he would count all the red cars on his road, and just certain things that it was just kind of, yeah, I would say it was more of like a, um, what's the words I'm looking for here? It was just more of an experience of learning at that point, getting kind of a different view on life and how this kid kind of works things out, in his own mind, right? So yeah, I don't know. I mean, that book was pretty good. And then I think movies really for me, like obviously that had more of an impact for me in my life, but I also wasn't really like you know, like it's funny now when I talk to people in their 30s and they'll start talking about like Disney movies and stuff. And I'm like, I've never watched any Disney movies, basically. It's like, I was killing kids in movies when I was like 10 years old. So I think I skipped the Disney phase, went straight to like CSI. But yeah, but,
That's a
um,
flex. While you were
so
watching Disney movies, I was
yeah,
in movies killing other kids.
yeah,
It's like
yeah, exactly. It's like
the
it was
the
just
thing.
different. But yeah, no. Um, but yeah, so I don't, it's for me, I think it's interesting. Like I would say it was more video games that I kind of learned from, like it's interesting nowadays too when I'll talk about certain things like, whatever, right? Specifically my mom, it's funny, I've said it to her a few times basically where I'll start talking about something and she'll be like, "Wow, how did you learn about this?" And I'll be like, "Video games?" Like, and then they're like, "Wow, you can learn stuff from video games?" And I'm like, "Yes, mom." Like, it's the same as a book or anything. Um, but I was big, I think that kind of, again leads into who I am as a person, kind of what I look for as far as like information and knowledge is definitely, you know, I'm I was big into World War II, and so like any of the movies, like Saving Private Ryan is still kind of one of my all-time favorite movies. But a lot of the games that I was started off playing were basically like World War II or like military base stuff like that. So I kind of learned, a lot through my games, I guess I could say, and then from there kind of, would seek out extra information about things that were going on in the video games that I was playing. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think I can't necessarily pinpoint like one or two things that really impacted me. I think it would be more just as a whole, Um, but yeah, that's my long answer, I guess.
I can imagine also it's like people usually ask the same question on interviews, and you've done more media than anybody I've known. So I appreciate you making space for your friend to support a
Yeah, no
shitty
worries.
sorry, shitty online podcast in a way.
Ah, no, that's okay.
But out of all the creative pursuits you were in, what do you think was your most meaningful venture out of those? Any movie or project that holds a special place in your heart for whatever reason that maybe
Yeah,
people have not
I
asked
think
as much about?
Yeah, I think if anything for me, I mean, sadly, it's kind of based out of loss, but like Running Scared is one of the movies that I myself, like, I just loved it. And it's kind of one of my only movies from, my younger years that I would like have no problem watching. Half the time I don't want to watch myself because I was just too young. And so I just like, I'll be watching one of my movies with someone and they'll be like, "Oh, you're so cute." And I'll be like, "Shut up." But but no. But yeah, no, like Running Scared was just amazing because the whole experience was crazy.
What was the plot
I
for
think
people who haven't watched it?
Running Scared is the movie. Basically it's kind of like a, you know, it follows a gun more or less. So it starts off with drug deal gone bad. My neighbor is Paul Walker plays the character of my neighbor. And he is basically the guy who gets rid of the guns for the mob. So as he's trying to get rid of a gun, I steal said gun and I use it to shoot my crackhead stepfather. And then the world unfolds from there. So the movie itself isn't, it's like a rough shooter, kind of crazy, crazy movie, but it was more the experience of being in Prague when I was like, I want to say I was like 11 or 12 when I filmed that. Um, but it was just that experience. Like I said, being someone who kind of, was always into, like World War II, older stuff. Like I learned so much about those things while I was in Prague randomly. Of course, knowing now, what Prague meant to good old Adolf there and everything. It was just interesting kind of learning, a lot about it. Plus, for a kid, Prague is basically like a city that's like stuck in medieval times, like I don't know about nowadays. I'm sure it's probably the same, but when I was there, there was like blacksmiths making swords for tourists in the streets and stuff, so it was like just a cool experience. And then of course being with someone like Paul, who to me was like a big brother. He was super cool to work with. And then of course, the tragedy happened a few years later. And so I think that, it made that impact on me just because he made an impact on me. The city I was in made an impact on me. I had also just come, like, we'd filmed that just after I was in China. So, like, that whole kind of, it was my first time overseas, I think. So it was like going from, my kind of like at the time, probably like a town of 80,000 people to then going to like Hong Kong and Shanghai, where you're in cities of millions of people. And then, going to like medieval times, basically in a city. It was just a crazy experience as a kid and very like, makes you appreciate where you're from and everything, I'd say I got cultured that trip, and so that was, yeah, it was a crazy experience. I
What
think
did you
as
learn from
well,
Paul Walker?
uh, you know, j- eh, just to again, like he was one of those guys where he was just himself, he dealt with the kind of critics and it's funny because I'll always remember, specifically when he passed, it was one of those things too where nobody really expressed love for that guy prior to him dying, and so for me, being someone who knew him, it was tough when you see all these people kind of coming out of the woodwork saying how great of a person he was and how much their movies impacted him and so on and so forth, yet those same people prior to him dying were probably calling him frosted tips Paul Walker and saying that he was in shitty movies and all he was worth was Fast and the Furious, but then he died and all of a sudden everyone's his biggest fan, and it's like, so it was interesting to see and then see how that affected me as well, just being that guy being like, well, I never heard, again, like no one was necessarily talking about Paul Walker prior to his death, and then after he died, all anyone could talk about was how great Paul Walker was, right? So I guess at that point as a friend I almost got like, I don't want to say angry, but like, I don't know, frustrated maybe. I don't know, it was just one of those things where it was like, you know it's a shame, he just died too young, and then another one as well that, again, sadly it's kind of based out of Lost, but was working with Patrick Swayze. Um, and I think his was more of, he was an awesome dude to work with, but his was more of like a cautionary tale to me, like he had his issues. He dealt with addiction and, like alcohol specifically, and you could just tell that he was a very troubled individual, like like I said, super amazing human being, like super cool, super nice, never like would never, be disrespectful or anything to anyone around him. But you could tell that he had his demons and that he was not dealing with them in the best of ways. And then of course, sadly, it was only like I think a year, 2 years after we had worked with him that he passed from cancer. And yeah, so that was much more of like a fatherly bond that I had with him. And so it was kind of one of those things where just wish I had more time, to chill with him and get to know him better. And then Luke Perry as well. Sadly, it's all people, that have died now. But Luke Perry was also super cool and just a super interesting guy again, as far as like what they had been through in life, and what they were kind of doing now, like Perry was actually working. I don't think it ever came to light, and it's funny because there's a bit of a conspiracy about it, but he was working on like a sex ring documentary kind of thing. And so there's some people that think that he might have gotten killed, not died. But it was, yeah, again, they're just super cool people that, I think that a lot of people took them for granted while they were here. And then, of course, as they're gone, everyone, sings their praises, right? But, I actually got to know those people and, yeah, they were just good people, So, yeah.
How do you deal with when it must be very strange if a friend dies and the whole world has an idea of who they think this person was, but
Mhm.
none of them ever met. like met them in some degree. So how do you deal as
Yeah,
an
no,
actor with the
exactly.
fact that people don't are not really interested in you as an individual, but they have this projection of you?
Yeah, yeah, well, exactly, right. And that's like I said, that's kind of how I felt with Paul, you know, like nobody was talking about Paul Walker prior to his death. And then after the for like months, all anyone could fucking talk about was Paul Walker, which I mean, good, like he deserved to be remembered. So, you know, it wasn't a terrible thing, but it was just interesting to see. And but I think it's also, you know, it kind of leads back into like I think we talked about it, you know, in the first chunk of this or whatever, but it kind of leads back to the whole, you know, sorry, I got dog hair in my mouth. The whole like flash relationships, you know, it's pretty interesting when you're there, you know, especially when you're in like a completely foreign country. Like I remember when we were in China, you know, there was really only like 10 to 20 people that we could talk to. Everyone else was local, so they didn't even speak English basically. But the people that we did have, you know, you're stuck in this world with these people for months at end, you know, months at a time, and it's all you can deal with. So you get to know people like on a different level than most relationships, and then you leave and you're probably never going to see those people ever again. You know, you might have like a premiere where you're going to see a couple of the actors and actresses, but like, you know, the crew members, the people in the background that you just meet and, you know, yeah, again, you're probably never going to see them again, right? So it's, you know, you try and keep in touch with certain people, but you know, you're just busy, or most of the time you're from different parts of the world. So you just, you know, the odds of running into those people are just very slim, you know? So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a bit different because again, you get to know these people so crazy in such a short amount of time that you you know it adds to the effect when you know they pass away, obviously, because yeah, like you just you get to know I think it's just a different kind of relationship and a different type of getting to know somebody, you know. It's like you kind of, you know, it's like making up a lifetime of you know friendship in like a month, you know. So it's yeah, I don't know, I feel like I'm rambling, so
No, you're not rambling.
hey.
It's very interesting. It's like the relationship as an actor with 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 death almost to some degree, because it's very strange, because many people just being forgotten, but as an actor somewhat you live on in this strange way, at least through the movies. What
Yeah.
is your relationship with death, or how do you think other people have this?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm one of those people. I don't like to say I'm like too morbid, but you know, I'm a realist when it comes to death and everything. I understand that it's something that, you know, it happens to all of us, and hopefully we can get our, you know, 70, 80 years out of our life and, you know, have a good life. And but I think as well, it's more I've dealt with a lot of loss in my life, not necessarily just in the film industry, but just growing up where I grew up, you know, most hey, hey, quiet. Thanks. Stop. Most of my sorry. Like most of my childhood friends, not childhood, I should say, but most of my like, you know, friends from my teens, they're dead, like, you know, from overdoses and so on and so forth. And, um, you know, dealt with a lot of loss in my family as far as like my dad's side of the family. So, you know, yeah, it's one of those things where you know, you learn to deal with it, I guess. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've been fortunate enough that, you know, again, nothing super crazy or bad has happened in my life. You know, like I said, people pass, and that it is what it is, you know. But yeah, I mean, I've always kind of looked at it as it, you know, that way, where it's a part of life, and hopefully, you know, the Sandman doesn't come too soon for anybody, but you know, yeah, and maybe it's, you know, on a psychological level, maybe I'm more used to loss because of that idea of those flash relationships. You know, it's like in theory, you get to know someone so, so close, and then you leave, and then that relationship more or less dies. So it's like, or I shouldn't say dies, like, but it ends, so it's interesting, because it's almost like when you lose somebody, when somebody passes away, all you really have to look back on is, your memories and time spent with them, right? So it's kind of the same as filming, like you meet all these people and you become such close friends, and then, like I said, that relationship basically ends as soon as the movie ends. So it's, yeah, maybe that helps me deal with it. Who knows? um it's an interesting psychological thing to think about now.
Very, very interesting thing. Very interesting thing. People learn about loss through different mediums. Um, Human beings have opened a lot of Pandora boxes at the same time. Currently, it feels we are like exploring many different things like immortality, resurrection, cloning people, changing our bodies, whether it's Brazilians who get their asses done or guys who become girls. All these weird things is happening. What do you make of the speed at which we are currently moving forward? And are you worried in regards to this to some degree? Because it almost feels like we're in a
Yeah.
movie right now also, where you're like,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's entertaining to say the least. But yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. Like, again, I'm one of those people that when I look at, well, I guess the big topics in the world right now, like, hey, quiet, like the global warming side of things and everything. I think, sadly, I would think that we as human beings are probably going to be, the death of ourselves. And it's probably going to be our technology or whatever. I'm not going to go as crazy as to say we're going to the Skynet realm yet, but, with AI and everything that's coming out, it's, you know, we'll see. We'll see what happens. I think what wasn't Putin and Jinping or whatever saying that they can live till like 180 now or something. So who knows? But I believe for sure in like the 1% side of things, right? Where sadly, you know, I think with AI, with everything, the whole like immortality is kind of within our reach, to a certain degree. I think that we're not very far off from, obviously we've kind of talked about this in prior conversations, but I don't think we're that far off of doing the whole, bringing someone's conscious to life through AI and through everything else. So, I think immortality, quote unquote, as a, an idea or, whatever the heck I'm trying to say. I think it's within our reach pretty quick here, but it's just going to be dependent upon who has access to that. So who knows? We'll see. I think for myself, it's interesting. One of the TV shows recently that I watched that I fell in love with that is super interesting as far as like the reality behind the fantasy, which is it's called The Expanse. It's like a sci-fi TV series, and for me, looking to the future, it makes the most sense as far as like, it's not like Star Trek, it's not like, these kind of things where there's aliens all over the place. Instead, it's basically, Earth is run by the United Nations. So Earth is just like the UN. And then Mars is like the separatists. So the people who didn't want to deal with the UN left and went to Mars, and they all live under like biodomes and don't get to go outside because they're terraforming Mars. And then everything in between is like the slums, which is the belt. And so like, the people on Earth, they are like the 1% who live in their dream world, and then Mars is like the angry, separatists who want the better life for themselves, and then the belters are like, they're born in zero gravity, so they can't even go down to Earth because gravity will like destroy them. So it's like and the only religion around are the Mormons, and they're like building their ship to New Eden, you know. And I'm like, well, there you go. I'm like, the day that we actually find aliens, every other religion goes to shit other than the Mormons. I'm like, they got it right, man. So it was just, again, like for a sci-fi fantasy show, it's like, man, I could see the world going that route, you know. So it's just interesting, you know, especially with the whole Mars thing and Elon, and you know, I don't know. I believe that we're not far away from, at least, you know, I would say, you know, it's funny that you said how fast are we moving. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just interesting seeing like cell phones, right? Like, you know, in my lifetime, when I was a kid, like you know, I'm only 32. But when I was in high school, like I didn't have my first cell phone until I think I was like 14. That's not a thing anymore, you know. It's like that was only 15, 16 years ago. And now like you're not seeing like a 6-month-old baby without a tablet in their hand, you know. So it's like, especially when you go to certain countries like China and everything, you know, like kids have cell phones at 1 or 2 years old, right? So it's crazy, you know. We're definitely, you know, I think that our innovation and the way that our technology is progressing is that exactly that, like we're gonna have to get very serious about, you know, yeah, too much progress, you know. But
It's interesting that you're
yeah,
saying
we'll
this
see.
with the kids. I was wondering if a more accurate way to see this is not like you see 1 years with iPhones, or that more like iPhones have 1 year olds to,
Yeah, yeah, exactly, right. Yeah,
you know.
every phone has its human.
Yeah, no, it really feels like this to me, and I've been blessed. I'm a behaviorist, so I've studied a particular psychologist who everybody should have a look at is B.F. Skinner, who was living in his 60s and professor in Harvard, who developed like great protocols for conditioning pigeons. And one of the things that I
Right.
always was very fascinated by was he had these Skinner boxes where there was a pigeon in a box and there was like food behind a lever, and he would train this pigeon based on when food would come out. And he, at the end, could teach these pigeons to run rocket systems. And I was like so interested that it's like these things have great power over us just by conditioning alone of when they reward us with something and when not. So that might be
Yeah.
something that I monitor. Anyway, um, if you could resurrect like 3 people from history for Cameron Bright's personal board of advisors, how would you use and who would they be?
Like Saddam, Osama. No,
You
no,
too. You too.
no. I don't know, man. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's who knows? It's funny. I don't. I think actually, I think one of the people that is fascinating to me now when I look back is Churchill. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that he was just kind of, again, it was like, you know, you like it's interesting because it all comes based out of the time, I feel like, right? Like, you know, it's kind of like the, you know, uh what is it? Iron sharpens iron kind of thing, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like the idea behind the times that we're living in and the people that come out of those times, you know? Like you look at us right now and what we've got, fucking Greta Thunberg, like I don't give a shit. You know what I mean? But like then you have World War II, and there were these amazing people that came out of that time because they had to be that way. You know, the Churchills of the world. Like if if you know, and looking into his life and what he went through, you know, as far as his failures and everything, and he just didn't quit. But that was what was needed at that point in time. You know, if certain people like him weren't around, you know, I mean, hell, the Hitlers of the world, you know, we wouldn't have had these crazy, you know, periods in time where again, then these amazing heroes and whatever come out of. So I don't know. I think that Jesus, sorry, dog hair everywhere. Um, I think, yeah, I think Churchill is like one that I can think of that I'm sure he'd be a pretty interesting guy to have a whiskey and
What would you
a
ask when
cigar
you see
with, you know?
Churchill?
Oh, who knows? I think it's just that is my way my brain works is I wouldn't even know until I was sitting there.
Yeah.
but,
I
but
always got cigars here after a podcast
yeah.
to celebrate these educators.
Yeah.
I guess we have one in person.
But
What's your
yeah,
take? What's your
so
take on
yeah.
Greta Thunberg, by the way?
What is she up to? I'm like, how does this chick get around so much? Isn't she in jail right now in Israel or something like that? I can't remember. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, for me, I think again, she's a product of the times that we live in. Like
Do you think
40
she's a
years
real
ago.
person?
I mean, I would say that she is very much like a wolf in sheep's clothing kind of thing. Like it's crazy to me that I don't even know how old she is. She's probably like 17, 18 or something like that now. But regardless, it's like having someone like that, I think it's kind of the same with Elon Musk right now, where it's interesting to me how many people follow these people basically and like listen to every word that comes out of their mouth like they're completely infallible, and it's like that's completely false. It's like we all know that Greta Thunberg's probably got some of the best funding in the world, like, and it's all, the George Soroses of the world that are giving her money. And to say that she isn't, you know, there's huge power in just that. She can go around and she can bring crowds and she can, kind of incite chaos whenever she wants, under the guise of, well, protecting the planet or whatever, and it's just it's crazy to me because it's like, it's like having someone like Leonardo DiCaprio be the national or whatever, the UN ambassador for climate change, and then you go to his social media and he's sitting on 250-foot yachts by himself. Like, and it's like, yeah, we really need to listen to this guy about how we're fucking the world up, like, it's just like, so, it's crazy to me because that's how I view Elon. Like, yes, maybe he's doing some good things, but it's interesting to me specifically. I mean, just the fact that everyone wants to say, oh, we want to go green because Elon Musk is making, Teslas, yet they see him as a humanitarian, basically philanthropist, yet his literal wealth is being made off like the backs of every African in Africa right now. And the amount of damage that every single one of his fucking lithium batteries does to the earth way outweighs anything else that any other country is doing. It's like here in Canada, we have like 30 somewhat. Well, I think we're up closer to 40 million now here in Canada. We're the second largest country land base next to Russia, I believe it is. And we basically have one of the highest carbon tax rates in the world. And it's like, why? Like one city in India puts out way more carbon than our whole country will ever amount to, So it's crazy to me to see how kind of, I mean, I guess how tricked we are right now. And it's by the people like Greta Thunberg and, Elon Musk and so on. So
It's these
yeah, I don't
characters
know,
also. It's like we spoke earlier about, like, I want to put uh, the impact social media has on us, where we follow characters and where the
Mhm.
television. One of the things I was thinking about is television has collapsed, but we still have a need for the entertainment factor, and it seems
Yep.
now it has
Well, it's
swept
like the
into the
news, right?
indigenous.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like the
because
news.
I'm like, and
It's
I would love
always
to have your take on it, because like Greta Thunberg, she seemed to also be a product of her parents, where they kind of like helped her to become this kind of archetypical
Mhm.
character almost. And we spoke about the Liver King earlier
Yeah.
on, and I kind of helped to see a resemblance between these. One of the
Yeah,
things I
it's
love about you is that you're just a real person. And I
sure.
sometimes I just you're like, but one of the things I
Sure.
find so scary about them is, like, I'm in Berlin right now, and Berlin has
Yeah.
like, I'm 5 minutes away where Hitler spoke. Like,
Yeah.
like literally,
Yeah.
that I can see the pictures, and he had this. He was also a character, and people
Yeah,
like
exactly.
encourage him to keep that and then follow him. And I just feel
Well,
like,
yeah, and again, he was very much a product of his time, right? Like he was that perfect, was in World War I, then became the angry, again, like yeah, it's what was it? The whatever that it was the Versailles Treaty, I think it was, right?
Yeah,
That did all
yeah.
that. But yeah, so again, it's like these people are born out of the times that they're in, and that's, again, Greta Thunberg just, it's, I mean, rest in peace, but it's like the Charlie Kirks and stuff too, right? It's like 50, 60 years ago, someone like Charlie Kirk would have just been someone debating people, and that would be perfectly normal. Where now we don't talk about shit. It's kind of hilarious how everyone, these days is all about mental health and, taking care of each other in the world and everything. Yet we have these huge divides in just being, natural humans and being able to have a conversation. I think that one of the biggest things, that we have is our ability to communicate, and we just don't do that anymore, even though we're technically as connected to anybody else in the world as like we're the most connected we've ever been in our lives. Yet, even though we can be connected to anyone in the world right now, we're actually the farthest from, you know, having a connection with most people. You either
Think
basically are on one side or the other side, you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, it's kind of a scary thing, it's like conversations kind of, start everything, right? So it's the fact that we don't have conversations, or at least we don't have real conversations anymore. It's even just like the news. It's interesting, to see the generate like the news is something I find interesting because you can literally see the generational gaps like right now. Like as a 20 to 30-year-old person, you probably don't watch the news. Yet you go to your grandparents' house and the news is on 24/7 and they believe everything they hear on it. Where anybody in our generation is like, the news is telling you lies, And so it's like, even that in like 20, 30 years, how has that gone from being like the standard to now they are the bad guys, where it's like, what happened there? Who knows, you know? But I think at the end of the day, it comes down to people kind of, not realizing, what was really going on. And they were able to kind of, hide behind their, suits and so forth. But nowadays it's like agendas and funding and, oh, is this news station being funded by the right or the left? And generally you can see who supports them via, like it was funny. My mom was just saying the other day here, because we've got plenty of politics and fun stuff going on in Canada right now. But it was what's his face? Carney was supposed to come back and then do the budget or whatever, and he still hasn't done it. And my mom was like, "Oh, CBC just put out an article about Carney and his budget and stuff." And I was kind of like, "Yeah, well, they're probably just doing that for appearance sakes because it's what everyone want to hear about." I was like, but they're also being funded by the government. So it's like, how hard are they really going to go on Carney? Probably not. They're just going to say just enough to get by and say, well, we're talking about it. But they're not going to do a smear campaign on their main funder. So it's just like,
in
again, it's like,
cigarettes in Germany have cigars
yeah,
even they have on top of it like the anti-smoking campaigns are supposed to be financed
yeah.
by the same company. I'm always thinking it's like, how motivated are you really to keep people from buying your
Yeah,
own
well, I
product?
mean, one of the movies that I was in, right? Thank You for Smoking. That's basically the whole thing. That's what it's about, right? Is it's like, my dad's a lobbyist for the tobacco company, and they talk about that too, where it's like, it's hilarious because, as you just said, like the smoking companies are the ones that are paying for the anti-smoking ads because they had like legally have to, but then everyone still smokes cigarettes. It's just like, I love the one movie that was interesting. Is Rock and Rolla. It's called. It's a Guy
I know that
Ritchie
movie.
movie. I love the one scene when Johnny Quid in it or whatever. He's at the bar with his buddy and he's playing the piano and he basically just breaks down a pack of cigarettes and what's on them and how it relates to basically like perfect human nature, it's like, it's like, oh, look at this. Oh, it has a golden sigil and a crown, basically saying that these cigarettes, oh, they're your royal friend, like they're here when you need them, whenever. Yet on the package, right underneath that nice golden sigil, it has smoking kills. So it's just reminding you that what you're doing is actually going to be the end of you, even though you want it, and just like the way that that scene is written is just so amazing, because it's the truth. It's just like, we do super crazy things in this world as human beings, knowing full well that they're not good, or they won't be good for us or anything. Okay, dog. And yeah,
Adam,
so
yeah, Adam and Eve, the story of mankind, like one of the oldest
yep,
stories. Like there's like, don't eat that apple, and now like
yep,
we have to eat it.
yep.
Yeah, it's very
The old
interesting that
temptation. Okay, dog.
temptation. Yeah, but it's. I'm not going to ask you if Greta Thunberg is the Hitler of our generation to not get us get us canceled. But I watched today a clip from Tim Dillon, great comedian, and you know
Yeah,
him probably. And he had this interesting take where he philosophized on air through his dark humor that people are engaging in this globalism, globalist entertainment to worry about problems on the other side of the world. That one of the side
yeah,
effects is that you're completely disconnected from the responsibility within your own community. And he made this
hmm,
example of somebody gets Josh, your neighbor, you don't give a shit because you're focused on Gaza. And it was very interesting
yeah,
to hear this, is that when I'm engaged in the theater on the other side of the world, that one of the side consequences could be that I'm stopping repairing my like feeling a sense of
hmm,
responsibility for the realm of my sector. And here in Berlin right now, we have a big homeless problem and drug problem on the streets. And I feel that because we are engaging in this global theater, nobody feels called to do something about it. Do you have
yeah.
something like this in Canada also?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the thing. Like, the big thing right now for us is that we have a very large Muslim population and everything here. So the whole Israel Gaza thing has been a thing here forever. And it's, we've had, churches getting lit on fire and all that fun
Oh,
stuff.
really?
So, oh yeah, yeah. And that's the thing, is like, our big thing was we had the trucker convoy. It's actually interesting. So, speaking of which, like the news and everything, my brother was just out east visiting my dad's side of the family, and my grandma's very, like, she's super Catholic and liberal and so on and so forth. And I guess on the news or something, they were talking about the trucker convoy, because people are still in jail for that. Like, they got their whole lives destroyed just because they drove a truck down a road and flew a flag. And it was one of those things where they tried deeming it as a terrorist organization and everything, when it was really just truckers trying to get across the border so they could work. And now, I mean, that was, yeah, 5 years ago. That was like 20, I think it was either 20 or 21. So 4 or 5 years ago. And my grandma was basically like, you know, sweet old Catholic lady, and apparently she thinks that house arrest is too soft of a judgment for these people. It's like, but why? Like, what did they do? They didn't do anything. Like, they weren't waving guns or, then fast forward to now, we have massive protests for Palestine, where you have people literally flying Hamas flags calling for the death of the West, and no one does anything about it. It's like, so where's the balance and equality there? Why is one, race or organization that's protesting, thrown in jail and deemed a terrorist organization when they weren't doing anything aggressive whatsoever, and then another organization that is completely aggressive and is very openly aggressive, nothing happens to them, and it's, oh well, they're just, trying to get their view across, right? So it's, yes, it happens here, and yes, it's kind of crazy. I always remember when Trump was first running. I think I mentioned this too in the other part, but I was sitting at a bar, and it was just one of those days where it was like noon, just super casual day. I was at the bar. There was like a guy to my left and a guy to my right. And of course, Trump came up on the news or whatever. And the one guy clearly made a joke. Like he just threw out a comment on Trump or whatever and was just like, haha, you know. And then of course the guy on the other side of the bar immediately got defensive and basically started arguing with this guy at like noon on a Wednesday in Canada. And instantly I was like, why are we fighting? Like we literally have no say in what happens in American politics because we're not in America. Yet every single yet this guy chooses to get into a basically almost a physical altercation over something that he has absolutely no power to make a difference in, you know? So it's yeah, I mean it happens everywhere. And sadly, again, I
Yeah, but
think it
that's
just comes down to that individuality, you know? People need a reason to shout and they don't have their own reason, so they just join the next team, you know? And yeah. So, I mean, even
yeah.
for us here, like we have the huge LGBTQ and stuff like that, right? I have a friend of mine who's from Iran, like born and raised in Canada here, but like his grandma's still out there and everything. And he literally just went over there like 6 months ago and almost didn't make it back because he was almost trapped in his own country, you know, and he's Iranian. And then you talk to him about like, you know, LGBTQ for Palestine. And it's like everyone's like, go to Palestine, like see what happens. Like
Here,
they will
one of the
not
things I,
support
I
you.
I
You
see I
know, it's
see
like
here today, it's like
it's just like
Berlin is a crazy country. We have like one of the biggest Palestinian populations in Europe, and
right.
it's like we have like more, and but we also have a very big gay community here, in a way. And
Yeah.
one of the wildest things for me to see was like transsexual men on the streets with Palestinian flags. And I'm like, this is, they would kill you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's just the
They
truth, you know,
and it's
like
like one
it's,
of the
you know,
things I would say is like there was just an interview with Charlie Sheen and Tucker Carlson, and one of the sentences I heard from Charlie Sheen, I'm not sure if you've seen, it, said
Charlie
that
Sheen and Tucker. I gotta watch that.
it's, one of the guys who's my dream podcast guest. I wish you would like
Yeah.
be on a podcast and say like, what the fuck this guy? But he said like that he watched a documentary on Tucker's channel on his network, and he said like, I realized I haven't done my own research in such a long time.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm seeing here is that these people are just applauding and following everybody, and they don't do the actual research in seeing, for instance, like what does the Hamas charter actually say? And for instance, like I read many of the autobiographies of the great dictators because I wanted to know how were they able to lead people towards
Yeah.
hell and what
Yeah.
was the thing. And I feel this is not happening anymore. Anyway, I am digressing now a little bit. If you would write an antidote for Canada, what is like? Imagine you have a little letter that can get sent to every Canadian's home. What would be one of the
Vote
things you would speak
conservative.
about?
No, no, no. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's yeah. I think it's interesting because we just like we've always been. I think it's kind of like the United States as well, is that people forget their roots, you know, like people forget that we all like I'm not native, so I did not come from this country, you know. I'm German, Scottish, and Irish. Like I'm a potato eating, drinking storyteller, you know. So it's crazy to me that, you know, people, I'm one of those people that I'm all for immigration and all that kind of stuff. I don't mind, you know, I believe in the fact that people, yeah, there's shit going on in the world that we have plenty of space. If we can bring people in, then yeah, bring people in. But again, you have to, you know, it's kind of like I feel like Germany was one of the places where they actually did it, where they moved in like some 20,000, you know, immigrants to a city of only like 10,000 locals. So it's like, you know, it's stuff like that. It's like of course there's going to be trouble. Of course there's going to be now the angry old people that don't like these young new people, you know, like it just that's human nature at that point. And so I think we really just need to realize that we're all from somewhere else and that we can all make our lives good here. We just need to kind of, again, I think it just comes back to that, like, having respect for others and their views. It's like, yeah, okay, like I'm one of those people. I'm not going to say Muslims are bad just because they're Muslim. That's terrible. That's a terrible thought process, right? We have white supremacist groups here. You have radical Christians, radical Catholics, like there's radical anything, and especially when it comes to religion. So we've got bad apples in every group. You take a group of 100 people and probably 10 of them are going to be assholes. It's just the way it goes. So, you know, I don't know. I don't know. Sadly, I don't know if there is like an answer that just fixes everything. I think again, it's just the simple like having respect for the people around you and their views, and then respect yourself and your own views too. Like there's no reason why we can't have our own voice. And obviously then these days that's how we feel. That's why things like Charlie Kirk and everything happened. It's like, why are people celebrating anyone's death, let alone some dude who just argued with people? It's like it's like, if you don't like him, just ignore him. Why does it have to be, oh, death to him? So it's, I don't know. It's
I,
a
wo-
tough one to answer.
I worked with psychopaths for a while during my studies, and one of the things, I had a great psychologist who was my mentor, and he shared some of his horror stories, and he said that people, one of the things he was looking out for was when people would show up with a mask, like they would present to you who they want you to believe them to be, like,
Mhm.
and he said whenever there was somebody who was too fast in looking behind that illusion that this person wanted to cast on you, he said something would happen that was called narcissistic rage, where he
Mhm.
said like he would attack that person. And it's like, I really believe that this is one of the reasons why in movies vampires destroy the mirrors to some degree, because it's actually like a good indicator to see if you are on the more on the goodness or the evil side of life. Like how do you treat with
Yeah.
different opinions, and if you want to destroy them, like,
Yeah.
you know
Have you
what
ever,
community you go to.
I don't know if you watched it or not. I think it was originally based off a podcast, but it was called Lore, like Lore. Um, they did, I think there was like 2 seasons of it, but it's interesting because it looks back into history and explains the origination of stuff. So like one of them is vampires, right? And that was basically a thing in wherever, I can't remember where exactly, but it was like down in the States or something like that in like the 17 1800s. They would basically, if somebody died in their family, they would bury them, and then like they had to wait like a couple weeks or something like that, and then they would basically open up the casket, and if they still had like color in their face or whatever, then they were a vampire, because that means that like their body wasn't dying or whatever, right? But instead it ended up being that they fucking buried them outside in the middle of the winter, and so they just like they didn't decompose because it was cold out. And it's just but next thing you know, we've got people think they're vampires, right? And they're coming out of their casket at night just because they still have rosy cheeks. But it's like the very simple things where we're like, huh, like it's kind of crazy, but yeah, it's just interesting. Like I said, that lore one is crazy because again, it just proves these very common things that we look at today and explains the like the crazy bullshit that we as humans are like, oh no, like it's like, no, we made that up completely. Like there is a reason why that is not a thing. But so yeah, I mean, I think we as humans, that's the way it goes. We'll perceive things the way we want. We'll make up stories if we want.
I was once in Colombia with my dear friend Richard Berg. If he listens to this, shout out to you, another great actor you need to meet. And we were getting lost at the beach, and we were seeing some lights and walking towards them. And while we were marching to them, the flood was coming to us, so that we couldn't walk back on the beach. So we had to climb up a and walk to a swamp. And of course, we're two Westerners. We have never been through a swamp. We made up all different kinds of fears that emerged for us. So I took a big stick to arm myself instead that something would hurt us. And I remember like we would holding hands because we were so afraid. So it was a terrible picture of lack of courage. And my stick touched his last leg, and he screamed like a girl, said a crocodile is attacking me.
Yeah.
And we're just running like crazy to back to the hotel, and told everybody that a crocodile attacked them, until they said to us, guys, there are no
Like, there aren't
crocodiles
even
in
crocodiles.
this area. In Colombia. And we just realized it was just us being little bitches. And
Yeah.
just anyway, okay, if you, and then we're gonna wrap it up a little bit. If our ancestors would left us an advisory letter in an aspect of what we are going through, what do you think it would say?
Oh, geez, who knows? The world isn't going to be destroyed by 2050. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it would be pretty interesting. You know, I mean, again, the time capsule stuff is interesting. I don't think we have to go that far to really have, you know, again, like I said, that, you know, the fact with like news being, you know, perceived as completely different things now versus 20 years ago only, right? So I think if you were to go into the future or the past by any number of years, who knows, you know? But yeah, I think, yeah, I don't know. I don't even know how to answer that.
You were speaking of time capsules. That's one of the last questions I would also trust you with. But I would like to have a couple of rapid fire questions until we come to that. What's your favorite word, Cameron?
Fuck. No,
What's your least
favorite
favorite word?
word.
Oh yeah, no,
I don't
you
know.
can elaborate, of course.
Least favorite word, moist. No.
Moist.
No. No, I don't know. I don't know. That's actually a good question. What's my favorite word? I don't even know. Probably word. I say word all the time. No. See, like I wish there's probably like some very insightful word that I could use, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know what my favorite word would be. I think, yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one. Least favorite word, I think would have to be, you know, it's almost like not a word, but like you know, what am I trying to say now? I think I think it's like, what am I trying to say? You know, it's like it's not the word that I dislike, it's more like the action behind the word, you know, as far as it being almost what we were talking about earlier, where it's like, you know, communication and lack thereof, you know, it's like if we could just figure out how to communicate better, the world would probably be a better place, you know. So yeah, maybe that, like, you know, not necessarily the word, but you know, the meaning behind it, I guess. Oh, that's funny.
It's
I
I
just
talked
I just got
with
an
Gary
email from
Gary
Gary
about this,
Word.
and it's like it's a mutual friend of ours, Gary Files, and he said that one of the things that accelerated the degeneration of our culture is copywriting. He said that at some
Right.
point we started to use writing to generate leads and make money rather than honoring the word as a divine cornerstone of our civilization. Thought that was very interesting. Um,
Mhm.
an author you would like to have dinner with, dead or alive?
Oh, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I think, like I said, I was never really crazy into like books or anything, but
Or a person or originator. And the author means founder, originator, pioneer, somebody who did some creative shit.
yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty standard for me. Like it would just be, you know, even being able to have a conversation with some of the like the directors and everything. I think Guy Ritchie would be a pretty interesting guy to just have a conversation with, just because he seems like an interesting guy. Tarantino as well, but maybe I wouldn't want to have a conversation with him because he's a little bit crazy. But it's funny. I actually remember. I can't remember who it was or what. Sorry, 2 seconds. I've been super busy. It should be around in an hour and a half. I might stop by. Yeah, if anything. Sorry, my landlord's just messaging me here.
No problem.
Oh, that's not him. Fuck. What's going on here? There we go. Sorry.
An author to have dinner with, and you said something already.
Oh yeah, no, I was gonna just go off about a story. I can't remember what it was, who it was. It was someone talking about Tarantino, and it was about cocaine. And I think they said that if you ever want to just like not do cocaine, hang out with Quentin Tarantino and somebody else while they're on it or something, because he just fucking goes off about the dumbest shit ever. I was like, yeah, I can imagine that. But yeah, anyways, I don't know. I mean, I kind of think it would be more like stereotypical kind of, I would think actually it would, I would say Jesus, be that guy, or like someone religious. Like I think someone religious, some one of the people that, because for me, I'm not crazy into religion. Like I believe in whatever I believe in. I don't hate people for believing in their own religion and stuff. It's, again, we need faith, we need hope. So have hope and faith in whatever you feel. But I find it interesting how much, I'm one of those believers that I think that we'd be much better off without religion. I think that most, you look in history and most massacres, most mass tragedies, most basically everything terrible, more or less, is born out of religion, or the hate of someone else's religion. So, I think it's one of those things where if I could actually have a conversation, it would be like, a fact checker of like, you know, Allah or Jesus, because it's like, I don't, it's like, was this your intent, when you wrote that book thousands of years ago? Did you intend everyone to fight over it and argue over it? It's like, I feel like that is so opposite of what their intent was. It was to lead us to salvation, and instead all it does is create chaos. So yeah, I'll say that. I'll be that guy.
Greatest book on this topic is Dune, from my point of view, which covers the story of that messianic figure usually comes with some side consequences.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
yeah. An author that comes to mind when you think of the word punchable.
yeah. Me? Punchable? Greta Thunberg? um, yeah, no, I don't know. Punchable is my TV, my wall. No, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm one of those people where I like to think that I use my words in situations. I'm not necessarily an aggressive person as far as physically. And I think that a lot of the time that's kind of born out of, you know, intelligence or lack thereof, choosing to fight somebody or punch somebody or whatever to get your point across, stuff like that. But yeah, I guess that's what I would say.
Final question, then I would like to say thank you so much for making the time. Time scroll. If this would be by any chance the last part that would remain of yours, what would be like something that you would decide to say to freeze in time if future generations would find this to listen to?
Yeah, I don't know. I think again, it just, be curious, it's just be that like, seek knowledge, don't like intelligence is, I don't think intelligence is based on, you know, like I don't think it's a birthright. You know what I mean? Yes, there can be intelligent people, geniuses or whatnot that are born, just smart as heck. But I think that information and knowledge can be attained no matter what, through as yourself, like reading books, looking into history, documentaries, whatever these days, just don't be afraid to seek and attain your own knowledge. I think that's, again, back to religion and everything, right? People are so forced into what they learn these days. It's even, schools and everything. That's why I'm almost afraid to have children these days, is because I know that what they're teaching them in schools is nothing that, benefits them basically, other than, math and science kind of stuff, right? But it's like, you know why are kids being taught to, destroy their bodies by the people who apparently are there to help them? So it's crazy to me. Even the people that we look to for our knowledge and intelligence are like, they're not even using their own, right? Most teachers here don't teach their own curriculum. It's handed to them by the government, to, the school boards, everything. So it's crazy how much we've limited, people's curiosity, I would say. It's more just like, here's the information, memorize it and live by it. It's not, oh, go find your own, answers in life, right? So I guess that would be my you know, message to everyone, is just be curious and, don't be afraid to be that way.
The line's also kind of one of the greatest things that I've learned from you, which I feel is being a fly on the wall. In traditional education systems, you're handed what to learn. I think it's so special that you were immersed in an actual craft that you learned from very young. I was wondering if
Mhm.
we maybe have to move away from this generalized approach of, and maybe like specializing in children a little bit more and emerging them in the very craft they hope to master. Um,
Mhm.
how can we support you? Like, for the people who are listening to this, you are always engaged in beautiful visions. What is something, where can we find you? And what is something the people who listen to this, including me, can do to accelerate your own ventures?
Yeah, just follow me on the social media stuff. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. Instagram, I think I'm Papa Kriggs on, and then Twitter, I'm just at Cameron Bright. So that's easy. Um, but yeah, just keep an eye out. Hopefully, like, I'm definitely looking to, start kind of pursuing my acting more full time over the next few months. So hopefully I'll have some movies or something to show everybody soon enough. I know I've got my one movie that's just in editing, so hopefully by next year, keep an eye out for that. It's called Suicide Disco. It's a bit of an interesting one. Um, I won't get too far into that, but yeah, just follow my stuff, follow me. That's really all I can ask for. Yeah, that's about it.
Cameron, it's been an honor and a privilege to be friends with you and to learning from you all along. Had you as a companion, as a mentor, and also as an example for many different things. And I hope that some people could look behind a bit of the facade of how you became the cool guy that you obviously are today. And for those listening, thanks so much for making room in your busy curriculum for long format conversations that are non-scripted,
Yeah,
that have mistakes and dogs in them and human
yeah.
beings just showing up. And
wardrobe,
I hope
wardrobe, wardrobe, and location change for me.
landlords calling up everything and not going to cut everything on uses
Yeah.
out. I hope that you prefer and you see the value to authentic sources of information and stories rather than these scripted characterological depictions of people who actually don't exist and who are actually not your real friends. Thanks for everybody for listening. See you in the next episode.